From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Glad to have you along. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien will comment on this week's grain market action, which featured an impressive rally in soybean prices in particular, and gains in corn and wheat prices as well. Dan talks about whether these improvements in prices represent marketing opportunities for you growers. Then K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti will talk about estimating soybean yields at this stage of production using a simple field sampling approach that's far easier than the traditional method of projecting bean yields. Later on, we'll welcome back in K-State's Mary Knapp for her weekly glance at the Kansas agricultural weather scene. All this and more straight ahead on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, our Friday edition. Thanks for being along with us. Well, it's been a rock-solid week for the grain markets, let's put it that way, as we get into the current trends now with our guest, Dan O'Brien, grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension. Friendly market factors very abundant right now in these markets, Dan, and we could pick and choose from any number of things, couldn't we?
Well, just compared to a week ago, we're 20 to 30 cents higher on these major futures contracts that we're watching. Here at Dees corn closed yesterday at $3.58, and it wasn't that long ago. We were hoping we didn't fall below $3.20. And for the wheat market, hard red winter wheat, September contract, which, by the way, is just about to enter the delivery period, $4.60. We've been to $4.30, $4.40. And for soybeans, jumped above $9 now. It's November at $9.42.
It's been a while since we've talked about $9 beans, hasn't it?
Well, that's right. Overall, worries about dry areas and the Iowa storm that came through affecting yield prospects. Iowa and Nebraska generally thought to be the worst hit, the eastern part of Nebraska, but also some areas in the eastern Corn Belt, Ohio, Indiana, et cetera. Some dryness kind of bleeding over into Illinois. Of course, we, in the very western edge of Kansas, heading, I guess, right across the border into Colorado, they've got some tougher areas too. Texas, pretty tough. So concerns about production prospects here in the U.S. coming into play. One number that I've heard of late, which seems to make as much sense as any, is instead of 15.3 billion bushels of corn here this year, which is just about what the USDA projected in that August report. Are we at 14.6, 14.7, 14.8? So we're already knocking that down some. Again, with the large carryout stocks, 500 million bushels would take 2.7 billion down to 2.2 if that was the only thing in play. The other aspect of this that's in play on the supply-demand balance sheet is the demand side. In agriculture right now, we're excited, surprised, almost shocked that day after day after day to see purchases of soybeans, corn coming out of China and other countries that are looking at what are reported to be high prices in Brazil as they finish up their at least their soybean availability. No doubt have in sight the end of their corn, that we're getting business here in the U.S., some of it from China, elsewhere. As you well know, there have been discussions here of late between the U.S. and China with regard to how phase one of the trade agreement was working out. And it seems that there's so much demand over there, basically because of their problems with flooding and you name it, that phase one demand may not be that difficult to reach, and that they may, you hear market talk that maybe they're going to rebuild their stocks. So where we stood August 1 through August 12th, with the relative pessimism that were there and the hand-wringing of what's going to happen, boy, again, production concerns, that storm in particular, and the ongoing dryness, and actual in shoe leather action from China, not just promises, but actual action in the market has affected quite a bit. And, we talked some about where things were on the future side. When we have so much movement, it's good just to go back and look at exactly what happened. It wasn't, but a few weeks ago, we were about 308 for September corn futures, closed yesterday at 344. The high recently here in late June, early July was about 355. So we're at 344. We get about 355. Then those that pay attention to charts will wonder, well, where will we figure out where we're going? Just take a look at the wheat on that. The wheat had gotten down to 410, closed yesterday at 441, had been to about 465 within the last month or so. So again, as we continue to move higher, that's a possibility. Russia has good exports, has weaker currency, et cetera. But really the one country in the world that has issues or set of countries to be the European Union, just extremely dry, and it's affecting U.S. export movement. When we get a week where U.S. exports for all wheat and hard red beat what we need to meet the USDA's projections, need to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And for the week ending August 20th, about 23.75 million bushels of wheat moved, actually shipped. We need about just under 19 to meet the USDA's projection. So that's bullish news. For hard red, that same week, 9.9 million bushels of movement for hard red winter wheat. We need about 7.7 to meet the USDA's numbers. So if you're a wheat producer and you have a wheat that you're holding on to sell, these are probably rightly looked at as some opportunities. I would just finish up on soybeans. In April, we had gotten down to about 810 or so. By the time we got into late July, early August, we had bottomed out at about 865. Yesterday, we closed at 937, got up over 940, towards 945. So different world. As we were sitting there back in August, we'd have been shocked to think that there's the room for this much optimism in those markets. But again, exports, crop problems, real surprises of that windstorm have changed our perspective on these markets.
Staying with the soybeans for just a second here, Dan, the U.S., as you alluded to, does have leverage now because that South American soybean crop won't be available to the market until early 2021. So the U.S. is in the catbird seat as far as sales here. And what does that suggest about the prospect for even higher prices? It would seem to be a favorable indicator.
And it would seem to have explained why the Chinese were such aggressive agents, such aggressive buyers for the last several weeks, daily coming into the market and buying. We look at where we're at now and wonder how much higher it can go. They, 2 months ago, had a pretty good idea of what they needed probably and what Brazil had and wanted to get. Well, the getting was good at a decent price. So that's how we got to this. But in terms of forward sales, I think that's what you're probably driving at. Total sales for this upcoming marketing year starting September 1, projected by the USDA at 2.215 billion bushels, and forward purchases on the books of about what the USDA said in this report, and with other things that have happened since that, about 880 million. So, we're arguably 45% of the way there. For other commodities, you'd say, well, gosh, they can put in a bid to buy and they don't have to fulfill it. But I think at least up front here, where else are they going to go to fulfill it? So if it's on the books now, there aren't many places to slink off to and not have to fulfill that contract. So that's a big thing, I think.
Well, these encouraging things that are developing in both corn and beans bring to mind the question, should producers be taking advantage of these nice pops in the market of late and pricing more new crop, or should they remain patient to see where this goes from here?
Well, I think, as in so many instances, it depends on cash flow needs. And who can doubt that once the combines start to roll, that we still probably going to have a 14 billion bushel plus corn crop, and that there'll be times when we'll have trucks sitting at elevators and they'll, with lines, and the basis will widen out. So what it does is I think anyway, the way I would view it, it probably puts people in the mode of looking at what post-harvest storage hedge opportunities there might be. We don't often do that. For us to be like a storage forward contract, but to look at what post-harvest futures do and to see what carry there is in the market. Just on yesterday's closes, here D's closed at 358, May was 376. So 18 cents there, July 380. So 20 some cents. When is that a good bid? Well, it's a good bid if you got a good basis to go with it. And in Kansas, we've had tremendous basis bids for the upfront. I think the thing to watch would be what type of basis do they give you out there post-harvest. And so here you asked me a straightforward question. I hope I just didn't dance around it. But I think what this does, if we have a harvest low and we see these demand issues holding up, it probably will motivate people to hold some grain. And if everybody holds grain, and then given what can happen in the world, it's at least worth knowing what a storage forward contract with a good basis, capturing and carrying the futures would do past the first of the year into March, April, and May.
And lastly, same question for our wheat growers out there still sitting on old crop. As far as what the market is presenting right now, those prices might be, somewhat enticing.
Well, if we have short memories, it's enticing. Interesting that back in February, we were looking at 520, 490, et cetera. Now we're back to 441. So if they have old crop, that could give them some opportunities. But the bugaboo, as always, with wheat on new crop is that the risk of getting that crop up and having something out there in the middle of the next year to sell. And if anything, you're probably looking at options, some type of futures situation that won't tie you into a contract if you're going to do some pricing for 2021 wheat this early.
Yeah. Dan, as always, thanks for your time and your input.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
He is a grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension is Dan O'Brien, along with us from his office in Colby, Northwest Kansas. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues here on the K-State Radio Network. Well, our soybean stands in Kansas throughout the latter part of the summer have reportedly been doing quite well, and we have hit a dry spell, but by and large, quality beans are out there yet. But for you producers really wondering just what sort of yield potential your beans are currently expressing, we're going to talk over a method of estimating soybean yields now. Ignacio Ciampitti is with us via phone once again, crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. He put out a recent Agronomy E-Update article on this very topic. Traveling the state lately, and, well, there has been in the past what's termed a conventional approach to estimating soybean yields, but it can be somewhat complicated and cumbersome, to be perfectly honest about it. Ignacio, you are promoting a simplified approach to coming up with a soybean yield estimate for a given field. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, the idea is, as everyone knows, when you're looking at yield estimates, the frustration is that they usually are too complex and too time-consuming, labor-intensive, and usually we pick the right time of the day to do it. Most of the times under really excellent sunny conditions and very high temperatures. So, right. So in order to avoid having this problem of people quitting too soon, we want to make sure that we provide a simplified approach, something that is easy to follow, and then maybe the concept is that it's something that people can do in multiple sections of the field. And then most likely, if we do it like this, we'll have an opportunity to get things done in the most accurate way possible, but also to make sure that we get a fair estimate of the variability that we have in the field. So we are thinking about collecting smaller areas in the field but with the goal of capturing more variability. So let's say that a farmer has a 100-acre field, and then we already know 10 acres that are really poor, 20 acres that are kind of in the middle, and then maybe 60 or 70 acres that are really good. So we really want to go to these different areas and trying to capture as much as possible different areas of the field to make sure that our estimates will reflect what might be the average of the field. So if I have a 7% of the field that is in a soybeans are looking great, let's make sure that we do sampling in that section 7 times maybe, or the same proportion. And then when you go to the sections that they are 20% of that field, then we take 20% of those samples from the field, and then the last on the worst section of the field, if it's only representing a 10% of that field, we take samples from kind of up to represent 10% of that area. So that's just to cover what is the variability and to make sure that we capture the variability. If not, the estimate will be biased. The second point, just before we get into the components of the estimation, is what is the best stage and how early can you do it? We don't want to go too early, because if you go too early, most likely we don't have all the number of pods, and when you are counting, you will be counting, most likely you will be underestimating the total number of pods. In order to be truly precise, we need to be in around R5. When we are starting this process of filling the seeds, we can make an estimate and we can start making some projections.
Well, with all of that considered then, what about this sampling method? What are the mechanics of taking these appropriate samples to calculate a yield estimate?
This simplified approach, we are first going into the sample area. And the sample area is quite small. We usually tend to sample 21 inch of a row length. In a single row, when we are talking about 30-inch row spacing, in 2 rows, when we are in 15 inches, and then in 4 rows when we are in 7.5 inches. Imagine if you are in a 30-inch row spacing, you are taking only 21 inch from 1 row length, and depending on your plant density and your seeding rate, so if you farmer was shooting for 120,000 seeds per acre, you might find in that area only around 12 plants, okay? Because that section specifically is about basically 1 of 10,000 of an acre. And then if you go to 15-inch row spacing, so let's say another farmer is on narrow rows, in that case, that farmer will basically take in measurements on 2 rows of 21-inch row length, and then you most likely will find the same number of plants if you have a similar density. So, but you will find 6 plants in 1 row and 6 other plants on the second row. And then this 21-inch and represents 1 of 10,000 of an acre. And the beauty about this is like it really allows us to do more samples and to collect more variability.
Mm-hmm. And then you get into actually examining the pods and taking counts, correct?
Exactly. We usually what we do is we are counting total number of pods, and in that 21-inch, as I mentioned, in many situations, we don't need to count all the plants. What we are trying to do is to get a fairly representative, number of plants, it could be 5, 6 on that area, just to get a feeling of how many pods we have per acre. We count the total number of pods. We try to get an estimate from a few plants in that area, and then we calculate these pods per plant, and we represent that into pods per acre. Then the other factor here is the number of seeds per pod. We know that these seeds per pod will range between 1 to 4 seeds. If we are in a really good condition, we usually tend to use an average of 3 seeds per pod. If we are in a more expecting the next coming weeks drought environments, calculate maybe 2 or 1.5 seeds per pod. And the last factor that we can discuss is the seed size, which is, as we always refer in many situations when we discuss about yield forecasts or predictions, is the unknown component.
Right.
Usually will be defined in the next 3 or 4 weeks, and that's what we call the unknown component. We tend to use different numbers based on what we are expecting. If we are expecting a normal to large seed weight, we can use a number of 2,500 seeds per pound. If we have drought conditions, the number that we usually tend to use is 3,500 seeds per pound, which basically is higher because it means that we can feed more seeds. They are smaller, in a pound. So once you collect all this information, if we walk through one of the examples that we presented on the e-update, so if you have 264 pots, and then we have 2.5 seeds per pot in a really good growing season, we usually tend to use a factor for the seed weight that if the conditions are good, excellent, we divide by 15, which basically reflects this number that we mentioned before, 2,500 seeds per pound. And then basically the number there it comes closer to 44 bushels per acre. If we move to a drought situations, if we have a couple weeks with no rain, and then we turn to be probably lower temperatures, we will start seeing that maybe the seed filling will start getting shorter. Let's say that we finish with the same number of pots, as we mentioned before, 264, but now we are going with less seeds per pot, 1.5, and then we divide it by a coefficient that is a seed size factor 21, which basically reflects 3,500 seeds per pound. So it's a higher number, so which means that those seeds are smaller. In that case, that estimation comes to 20 bushels. And you can go through the document that we published on the year date, August 21st, and then you will see the importance of the seed weight. Mm-hmm. One another approach could be if you want to play to understand how much seed weight contributes to the yield, because that's a question that many farmers are asking at this point. You can just play with the idea of saying, what happens if I change only the seed size? And if I go with the largest versus the smallest? Just by doing that, you will change your yields from 44 bushels to 31 bushels. So the difference is close to 13 bushels. And that, friends, is what seed weight and how much seed weight is relevant for soybeans. So there is still a lot of yield on the table. We usually tend to underestimate the contribution of these next 4 or 5 weeks.
And here we have shared the variables that go into this calculation and how producers can put it together. It's best if they go to that article and see this in writing, and it comes even more clear. And as Ignacio said, it's all fully outlined in the Agronomy e-Update newsletter, which was dated this past Friday, August the 21st. It's on estimating soybean yield potential, and this is an exercise that you would encourage producers to take on. It's really not as hard, Ignacio, as it sounds.
Yeah, it's not. But I understand the challenges, on the next coming weeks, and then my reflection, even when we are in a very good spot today with soybeans, I want to be cautious, and I want to make sure that we still have a lot of yield to be defined, so we cannot just celebrate yet.
Right. That's for sure. And we appreciate you taking the time from the field to share this with us, and we will keep following the state of the soybean crop and see how it finishes. Until next time, Ignacio, many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric, for the invitation, as always.
Ignacio Ciampitti, crop production and cropping systems specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Again, estimating soybean yields, our topic on this part of Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You are tuned in to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network, again, now in our 96th year of broadcast service to agriculture in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson with you. Today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. A group of 25 senators have become the latest to press the Trump administration to take action against Canada under enforcement provisions in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement over dairy. The latest letter to U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue focuses on the tariff rate quotas on dairy announced by Canada, which appear to run counter to numerous USMCA provisions. Plus, the senators called on the administration to make sure that Canada eliminates its Class 6 and 7 dairy pricing policies. But they're also pointing at Mexico, noting that that country needs to be prodded on enforcement of side letters pertaining to geographical indicators. After a decline in the global economy this year, one USDA analyst says there's likely going to be a rebound in 2021, and that will help boost U.S. agricultural product exports. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Gross domestic product per person, GDP. That's how economists measure a nation's economic growth, or shrinkage, as the case may be. Normally, it grows every year, but not in this 2020 fiscal year. Global GDP expected to end up down by about 5% from 2019, thanks to the pandemic. But for this next year,
we do see a bounce back.
Agriculture Department Chief Economist Rob Johansson told us.
World GDP growth is expected to be at 3.7% for 2021. While that's good, it's still not quite as high as we had pre-COVID. So the economy is still taking some time to recover.
But recover it will, although Johansson says the actual amount of recovery is still uncertain since we won't even have begun fiscal 21 until October 1st. Generally, the stronger the world's economy, the stronger the exports of U.S. ag products to the world. And with the world economy expected to grow 3.7%, USDA indeed forecasting U.S. ag exports to rise about 4% in 2021. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
More from the USDA on that. U.S. agricultural exports to China in fiscal year 21 are now forecast to rise to $18.5 billion, up from $14 billion in fiscal year 2020. That's a forecast that the USDA raised by $1 billion from its prior outlook. China factors into increases for several commodities, including sorghum, wheat, and soybeans, according to the USDA. U.S. ag exports to China so far in fiscal 20 through June were at $11.1 billion, up sharply from the $6.7 billion at that point in fiscal 19. Overall, U.S. agricultural exports in fiscal 21 are forecast at $140.5 billion. That would be against imports of what would be a new record of $136 billion, leaving a trade surplus of $4.5 billion. And as expected, the USDA lowered its outlook for fiscal 20 U.S. ag exports, trimming it by $1.5 billion down to $135 billion, raising imports by $1.5 billion to a new record of $131.7 billion. That would leave a trade surplus for fiscal 20 of just $3.3 billion, the smallest since fiscal year 1972. You're listening to Agriculture Today. The Wheat Foods Council is a staunch promoter of wheat-based food consumption. And just like about everything else, its efforts this year have been impacted by the pandemic. Nonetheless, the council has found new and creative ways to forge ahead, continuing to reach consumers with important information on the role of wheat foods in good nutrition. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
Wheat producers in Kansas and across the country came together in 1972 to create the Wheat Foods Council as a national nonprofit organization to promote the category of wheat-based foods. Due to COVID-19 and the unforeseen circumstances we all faced, Wheat Foods Council activities looked a little different this year. During the year, they usually hold a summer meeting to give members an update on activities and make plans for the upcoming year. That took a slight change this year as they hosted the meeting virtually. Cindy Falk, nutrition educator for Kansas Wheat, serves on the program committee. She said that while work with personal trainers continues to be a big focus, promoting enriched wheat foods is also a priority. The Wheat Foods Council is working with well-known influencers such as bloggers and chefs to develop recipes which are always popular on the website wheatfoods.org. Along with meetings being held online, they are also transitioning their content to be online as well. By doing this, they have seen a great change in activity and success. By creating short 1-minute videos with experts and infographic-style communications, they were able to get their point across in a productive and fun way. Once they had created these videos, they then put them out on social media and were able to have a tremendous pickup in return. According to Tim O'Connor, president of Wheat Foods Council, we are excited to share the news that our videos targeting personal trainers surpassed 1 million views last week. As many of you know, we pivoted to producing short educational videos in April as COVID-19 shut down the personal trainer events where our experts would have made presentations and would have exhibited. We felt delivering these videos on social media was the best alternative to continue our educational outreach while in-person activities were unavailable. Our videos are reaching our target audience in an entertaining and informative way that is highly successful. Personal trainers have a reach that works as a direct impact on their clients. The clients then share what they've been doing with their personal trainer to their networks, whether it be friends or family. When they started this collaboration in 2015, most personal trainers did not realize the nutritional value of carbohydrates, but over the years, Wheat Foods Council has noticed a huge turnaround on that. O'Connor said we picked personal trainers as our influencer target because they were giving bad information that was reaching a lot of people, and we thought it was the right step to turn it around. In addition to their work with personal trainers, Wheat Foods Council also works with chefs that set the menus for restaurant chains and major international companies. One reason they chose to work with these influencers is because of their reach and followers, allowing them to impact many people. They partnered with a culinary institute to educate the chefs and inspire new items on their menus. As this fiscal year just got started, Wheat Foods Council is not slowing down with new ideas in hopes to educate people about the nutritional benefits of wheat foods. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. And this quick calendar item, the Cottonwood Extension District will be hosting a grain sorghum field day in Barton County this coming Monday, beginning at 9 o'clock in the morning. The location, 1 3/4 miles north of Hoisington on Sasank Road. Seed company representatives will be on hand to discuss sorghum hybrids, and Extension's Lucas Haig will look at sorghum production practices. J.P. Michaud on insect issues. Contact the Great Bend Extension office to register and reserve your spot today. This is Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Agriculture Today closes out now with this look at Kansas agricultural weather and the very latest from the Weather Data Library here at K-State. Over once again is K-State Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. This past week can be summed up, Mary, very briefly, dry and hot.
Yes, it has been dry and it has been hot, but it may surprise you to know that overall, statewide, for the week ending on Tuesday, we were still slightly cooler than normal, about 0.2 of a degree cooler than normal, which is kind of hard to register, but it was warmer than normal in the northwest and cooler than normal in the southeast, and they almost balanced each other perfectly with the departures on that. Keep in mind that as we move into the fall, as we are doing now, the northwest cools off more rapidly than the southeast, and so therefore it has more potential on the upside, you might say, as far as temperatures go. We are expecting a cold front to move in for this weekend and into next week, and in fact they're calling for cooler than normal temperatures statewide for both this 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlook. And indeed, they are talking about frost in the Dakotas as a potential. That cold of air is not going to make its way into Kansas.
To be clear, again, right.
They're already talking about it up on with our northern neighbors.
It was dry virtually throughout Kansas this past week?
It was pretty much dry statewide. There were a few pockets along an area from northwest to west central Kansas, but they were very, very isolated. Some places saw as much as 0.7 of an inch. But again, as I said, they were extremely isolated amounts. Overall, the statewide precipitation was about 10% of what we normally would see. So again, limited. And in fact, the 3 eastern divisions averaged 0. So it was hard to see any moisture at all out of it. And with the arrival of the 2 tropical systems on the Gulf Coast, both Marcos and Laura, we did not see much impact from that at all. There was a little bit of rain in southeast Kansas yesterday, 1/4 of an inch or so, but most of that moved up through Arkansas and then into the Ohio River Valley, and so we saw very little of that beneficial moisture that can sometimes come with tropical systems.
Then have we seen a worsening in the drought monitor?
We haven't seen a change in the drought monitor yet. It takes a while for that to start ramping up because we did have such a wet period to end July and begin August. But we did see a little bit of D3, which is the extreme drought, creep into Greeley County in western Kansas, but we're talking, like 0.3% of the state. It was just barely creeping over the border. If we don't see any productive rains from the systems that are expected this weekend and into Tuesday morning, then we'll definitely see some deterioration across the state.
But you say that quantitative precipitation forecast suggests that we will see good rains around Kansas.
Yes, the quantitative precip forecast, which it covers the period through next Friday, favors us seeing fairly generous rains, the heaviest in the eastern part of the state, where we may see as much as 2 inches of rain. And it's very interesting, this particular outlook shows some of the heavier moisture stretching into southwestern Kansas, basically along the Arkansas River Valley, and we'll see how that develops. But there they may see 1 inch, 1.25 inches of rain. So again, that's the forecast and not necessarily the rain on the ground. So we'll see what develops from this. It looks like it may be an east wind bringing some upslope moisture and developing from that. And then we'll see how much is squeezed out with that cold front that's coming in.
But just about everybody will receive something, it sounds.
At this point, that's what the outlook is. The question will be just how much and how evenly is it distributed, because overall we could get that, but it may be concentrated in a couple of storms, which would not be as helpful as having a more widespread rain event. And again, we're getting close to people getting ready to do their fall planting, and it would be nice to add some moisture to that soil profile in advance.
You bet. And what does the extended forecast tell us as we get into the second and third week of September?
Well, the September outlook stays as it was, which is favoring warmer than normal temperatures for the state for September and split in the moisture with a slightly increased chance for wet in the east and a slightly increased chance for dry in the west.
So it is setting up to be a decent start to the fall. We shall see, but we're also keeping an eye out on La Nina. Conditions are leaning toward that settling in.
Right. The outlook has strengthened for a La Nina to develop this fall. It's still not certain by any means, but it's trending that way. The water temperatures along the Pacific, where they monitor that for the declaration of a La Nina, have continued to decline, so it's moving in that direction. And the upper air patterns are also configuring as a La Nina pattern, which again strengthens the possibility that we'll have one before the fall is over. And again, as we remind producers, a La Nina tends to favor a hot, dry fall and a mild, dry winter.
So any moisture we can get in advance of that will be even more valuable.
Right, because again, as producers are well aware, as we go into the winter season, the amount of moisture that we receive even in a normal year is fairly limited.
Yeah. Well, we will keep an eye on that, of course, and everything else regarding the Kansas agricultural weather scene, as we'll welcome you back in next Friday. Mary, many thanks to you.
Thanks, Eric.
Mary Knapp, climatologist, K-State Research and Extension. We'd remind you also to take full advantage of all of those weather-related resources at the Mesonet website out of the Weather Data Library at K-State, mesonet.ksu.edu. That concludes today's edition. Thanks to you as well for being along with us, and do enjoy your weekend. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.